So first off, I want to tell you about coordination. So what's coordination? Coordination is the organization of different elements of a couple of complex bodies or activities so as to enable them to work together effectively. So that's the quote. Now, the coordination problem is the highlighted bit, and I think we can all admit that it's like a very, very difficult problem to solve when we apply that to people. So what does it even mean to work together effectively? Do we come up with some kind of generalized model that we try to, of human behavior or human coordination that we try to optimize? So a very common response in the traditional world is, and to coordinate at large scales in traditional companies, is through a top-down chain of command structure. And while it's very widely adopted, it's also very often associated with things like extensive bureaucracy, suboptimal incentive structures, and there's a lot of very redundant middle management. So we know from the shirking problem from economics that people who are paid a fixed salary, they will try to work as little as possible. Then we've got managers who try to compensate for that type of incentive misalignment. But very often, the managers themselves actually, their incentives aren't aligned with those of the organizations either. So another problem with the top-down approach is that there's like a lack of ownership and autonomy. So not having exposure to the upside or not having influence on the big picture of your work can lead to things like burnout, disempowerment, and apathy. And now, phrases like the Great Resignation and nobody wants to work anymore are surprisingly common. So we think there has to be a better way. Actually, polycentric thinking takes an entirely different approach. So instead of a top-down rank hierarchy, groups of people with shared overarching goals self-select, and they organize into cooperating local units. So they could be based on interest, fit of skills, work streams, you name it, can be anything. So that really embraces the principle of local coordination, which means that the best people to solve a problem are the people who are close to the problem. And then we can have units that are nested, we can have units of people, we can have units of groups, and we can even have units of entire organizations. So polycentric governance is based on these group dynamics being the driving force for decision making. And I really want to stress that what's key here is local interactions. It's not a central coordinator. So this form of governance takes now full advantage of collective wisdom, and it can also leverage the incentive structures that come with shared ownership. And at face value, such a system looks very, very complex. So now I wonder, should we be worried about how complex it is to design or maintain such a system? The short answer is no. And to find out why, let's check out ants. So now I think we can all agree, or we know, that ants aren't very clever. But somehow they manage to do amazing things. So they coordinate on a very wide range of non-trivial tasks, right? So they weave nets out of silk, they grow and harvest fungi, and they construct elaborate tunnel networks that are even resistant to water damage. And they can do a ton more. So now Deborah Gordon was one of the most prominent experts on ant colony behavior, and she wrote this really cool quote that I love. And she's essentially saying that the history of our understanding of ant behavior is the same as the history of our changing views on how organizations work. So in the 18th century, we thought of ants as groups of subordinate laborers who are just happy to serve their monarch. Then we evolved, and in the 1950s, we thought of ants as products of free markets' natural selection. During the Cold War, we thought of ants as totalitarian societies. In the 1980s, we thought of ants as mechanical processes of chemical signals and fixed responses finely tuned by evolution. But now, today, actually, we think of ants as decentralized, self-organizing systems which are emerging from dynamic networks of local interactions. So the very important thing to stress here is that decentralization doesn't mean that every ant gets to vote on every small microscopic decision before any action could be taken. It's actually quite the opposite. So it means that the system can function through ants communicating and aligning with their immediate local environment in a manner that doesn't need to rely on any single centralized point of reference. So that kind of decentralization is really the most important thing we care about in social organizations, right? So we want to empower local coordination and sentiment to emerge and propagate from the bottom up to achieve global goals. So when we observe that kind of oppressive behavior of ant colonies, I'm actually not very surprised that people used to think that there is some kind of super competent leader or some kind of divine person sitting at the top orchestrating it all. And complex system theory shows us why that assumption doesn't have to be true. So ants aren't actually unique in their way to demonstrate how local coordination can produce results greater than the sum of their parts. And actually, we all know one of the greatest recent examples is the internet itself. So the capability of the internet to foster those kind of self-organizing communities from emergent behavior is clear to almost everyone. So I think many of us, or if not even all of us in this room, have spent a large portion of our lives to contribute to online projects, online communities. And we have really seen how informal social structures can evolve organically from very humble beginnings. So there's like an incredible wealth of knowledge, time and work that has been put into open source projects and knowledge databases and those things. And all of those efforts are actually made voluntarily. So people are actively seeking to contribute to projects that speak to them and that speak to their values. So that sort of unparalleled self-selection has brought people together from around the world with shared interests and goals, enabling cooperation and mutually working on goals that they all care about. So communities often start with like a small handful of people close to the core problem, and it's consistently the wealth of interactions that organically grow those spaces into what they are. So as you can tell, the internet has already realized a lot of the potential that we have for coordination or coordinating with loosely affiliated groups. So if all of that potential is already realized, now what does Web3 and DAOs still have to add? So actually, it's countless people who donate their time to contribute to these public goods for various reasons. It might be personal growth, it might be the satisfaction of the feeling of being part of a social community, or maybe even for the feeling of autonomy and empowerment from having a voice in a voluntary group effort. That can be fun. However, this is very often done in addition to the work that those people have to put in to pay the bills. So while there's so many people that are attracted to an open and collaborative way of working, they choose to, additionally, for example, code for free while they're already getting paid to do so professionally. So I think that DAOs confuse the power of voluntary self-selection and open collaborative work with shared community ownership of collective efforts. So I think that DAOs can bring us a more equitable and empowering way of working together. So now, the internet has already achieved incredible things. But that's no reason to believe that its potential has been reached. So it's undeniable that the internet has been successful in its ability to bring people together. And that is the reason for why I'm so optimistic about what the future holds when shared ownership is added to the mix. Online communities plus incentives. So DAOs confuse the wonderful things about online organizing communities with the power of shared ownership. DAOs can make the choice between paying the bills and working in an empowering atmosphere obsolete. DAOs can also replace things like recruitment agencies with direct voluntary self-selection. And DAOs can substitute top-down hierarchical businesses from bottom-up community-owned and controlled labors of love. So DAOs can be a vehicle for a more equitable and empowered world. That's why we are excited about the potential for DAOs to change the world, and we want to make it more accessible than ever before to create, to join, and to contribute. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.